So we'll get going. Again, apologies for the slightly late start. Hopefully that meant you got a couple of bites of lunch before we got cracking into this. Just going to close this down. So again, kia ora koutou, welcome to Dyslexia Advantage, Thriving in Your Career. Look, my name's Tony Pownall. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Cultivate here, a recruitment firm based in Auckland. And I've got a very personal connection with this topic in that my daughter, who's now 12, is ADHD dyslexic. And I've got to learn a lot around different cognitions and learning styles, and particularly through the lockdowns of 2020, 2021, as I played both father and teacher, which was a fascinating experience. But I also have a very professional professional connection as well. Cultivate here is focused on being New Zealand's most inclusive recruitment agency. Now, whether that be your cognition, your age, your gender, your outlook, generally your ethnicity, we want to make sure that everyone that comes through Cultivate as a job seeker is treated with respect, with dignity, and that we appreciate that everybody is unique, and that we allow everybody to shine the best they can through a recruitment process and not be left behind. So as a part of that journey, we focused primarily at the outset on neurodiversity, which is where we were really introduced to Anton at Divergent Thinking, who helped us on the journey to understand how we could be more inclusive from a brain wiring point of view. The session today is all about possibility. Many of you will know that dyslexia can bring real challenges at school and at work, whether it's processing written information, spelling, note-taking, time pressure, or just navigating workplaces that are built around one narrow way of thinking or working. Now, the challenges are pretty well documented, and I don't want to focus on that today. I want to focus on the strengths that dyslexia can bring. Big picture thinking, creativity, problem solving, resilience, communication, and the ability to see patterns and possibilities that many others just simply cannot see. The other thing is dyslexia, I've noticed, seems to fly below the radar in a work setting. It's one of those cognitions that just doesn't get a lot of airtime. If you read the news, it's become quite trendy to be neurodivergent, in particular ADHD. Autism gets a lot of airtime as well, but dyslexia simply doesn't. So the aim of today is to shine a spotlight on this way of thinking, on this brain wiring, understand a little bit more about what it is and how it shows up at work. But as I said, primarily through the lens of it being a strength. How do we harness dyslexia to our advantage in the workplace? I want to move away from just coping with dyslexia to actually thriving with it and making it a tool in our professional success. We've got a fantastic panel with us now that they've finally been let in the door. And here they are in front of us. I'll start right to left. It's great to continue the association with Anton Ashcroft, a psychologist with more than 25 years of experience across forensic, clinical, corporate and prison settings. He now offers neuroscience-based leadership training, executive coaching and neurodiversity coaching. He's helping organisations unlock the potential of diverse teams. And then in the centre there, Graham, although that's you pre-beard, I see. Welcome to you. And thank you for making it. Graham's been in crisis meetings this morning trying to determine how they'll continue to move trucks around the country should we have a shortage of diesel in the coming weeks. So very thankful you've been able to get out of that problem-solving context into this one. But Graham is the General Manager of Optimisation and PC Plus at an organisation called Primary Connect, which is part of Woolworths New Zealand. Hence all those trucks delivering our food around the country. Graham's a senior New Zealand executive, but also a former Army officer, known for leading large, complex supply chains, simplifying complexity, restoring performance and building high-performance cultures. Great to have you aboard, Graham. We'll hear from you in just a second as well. And finally, to the left there, Michelle Sharp, the CEO of Power of Purpose Limited. Michelle is a transformational leader with deep experience in social enterprise, digital innovation, and organisational growth, and has led organisations including UNICEF Aotearoa and Kilmarnock Enterprises. So again, thank you for the three of you for being here today. So I'm going to jump straight into some scene setting questions to put to our panellists here. And the first one, just to get us started, I'd love to hear how each of you have personally thinks about this concept of it being an advantage, dyslexia. So, Michelle, I might move to you first, if that's okay. When you hear the phrase dyslexia advantage, what does that mean to you personally?
Great. Thank you, Tony, and thank you for the invitation, and hello to everyone. I think you framed at the outset the conversation around dyslexia really well. For me, for like many of us with dyslexia, when we were either at school or early career, it was always seen as a challenge. And I think it's so important that we actually, turn it on its head and actually see it as an advantage. So that's the first thing in Dyslexia Advantage is how do we turn it on its head? Typically people think of dyslexia as issues with written language. Well, actually, it's actually a different cognitive style that we operate in. And with that, it means that we think differently, we think big picture, we can cope with strategies in a different way to somebody who's not dyslexic. It doesn't mean it's better, I have to say. I think diversity in thinking is what's important, but dyslexic thinking definitely has an advantage in the workplace and in society in terms of how we view things, the big picture rather than the detail. So the quicker we can embrace that, I think that the more we can get out of everybody in the workplace.
Thank you. And Graham, I want to switch to you. When we first met, I think I was trying to work out the other day, about 18 months ago, you were talking about what you do day to day in your role, like it was nothing really. We joke about the fuel crisis and trying to determine, diesel stocks, etc. For you, that's probably something that's quite straightforward. And you mentioned in passing to me that I guess the way you think and see problems, you almost took for granted, because you were describing your role back then to me. I was thinking, oh, man, I'm tired just thinking about all the different parts of the puzzle that you have to put together, and the dynamics that is a supply chain the size of what you operate. What's your thoughts around this notion of dyslexic advantage?
Well, I think everyone's really different, and I think I can only speak from my personal experience. And I think there are some absolutely brilliant people who are dyslexic, and probably others who are less capable, like any group of people. And I think what Michelle said about being different is probably the key thing. It's not better or worse. And I think a good comparison is probably the difference between being left-handed and right-handed. There are things that are harder for a left-handed person, and there are things that are easier for a right-handed person. But the left-handed people disproportionately make up a bigger, they're overrepresented in the elite sporting people. And I think if you really scratch the surface, you'd probably find dyslexic people are probably overrepresented in senior business leaders. And I know, Richard Branson is a famous one, but a lot of, to me, being a dyslexic is about being a conceptual thinker. And I think it's about finding the right opportunities and the right ways of thinking. So if the job I was doing was all about infinite levels of detail, probably wouldn't be the right person for it. But when you've got someone who's dyslexic, they tend to be better at conceptual thinking. They tend to be better at seeing, three-dimensional problem solving, seeing how things fit together. And I think that's been a huge advantage for me. And again, it's different for different people. But for me, certainly in my experiences, that I'm a really strong conceptual thinker. And I think the other thing I was thinking about in this day and age, with AI becoming increasingly more the tool that helps with the detail, some of that ability to think conceptually is even more valuable. So it's always been important. I think it's probably understated, and I think people, when you look at senior leaders in business, there's probably a lot of dyslexics out there. They just don't necessarily always get aren't open about coming forwards about it, aren't open about saying that they think differently. But certainly, I think they're probably overrepresented in senior leadership roles.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. Thank you. Just before we get into it, we're going to get into some detail later on around some of the mechanisms or tools or way in which you harness dyslexia day to day, some good practical takeaways. But just sort of more broadly, staying in that sort of more general sense of dyslexia in your career, I'm keen to hear from the both of you, whoever wants to jump in first, just around your journey with dyslexia through your career. Has there been times when it's been noticeably a challenge and other times it's been noticeably an advantage? And has your relationship changed with this notion of dyslexia through your career? Michelle, you're nodding, so I might jump to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And Graham, everything you say, I totally concur with, by the way. Yes, for me, I had the fabulous combination of being dyslexic and English not being my first language when I arrived in the UK. And therefore, masking dyslexia became very, very hard for me at a certain point in my further education and then in my career. And for me at the beginning, when I was entering my career, the early stages, I felt that I had to just work longer and harder to fit into the system that existed. And that meant many, many longer hours. And I think it was my aha moment when I actually went into the telecommunication and IT sector, and I realized that there was actually a huge diversity in terms of how people thought and operated. And rather than trying to mask it, I decided to harness it. And that's when it really unlocked. And I suddenly became very open about the fact I had dyslexia as kind of my secret weapon in some ways. The fact that, as Graham says, don't give me a load of detail to look at, because I'm not the right person for that job. Somebody else is way better at that than me. But understanding where my strengths come and understanding where my challenges also come into play. And therefore, as I grew in leadership, I was able to surround myself by people who were the left-handed people to my right-handed people, by understanding what I do bring to the party and what I don't. And for me, it's very much about, big picture thinking, visualization in a different way. I'm able to take very complex situations, which is why I love transformation and change, and distill them down into much simpler nuggets of understanding for others. And I think also the other thing I've realized is I think this is dyslexia, is a courage to challenge systems of the past and maybe think about doing things differently. So that's how it's manifested. But it's taken, Tony, for me to be proud of being dyslexic rather than trying to mask it. So definitely a moment in my career where that changed.
I was going to ask you about that when you talked about that transition from sort of masking to embracing. Was that about personal confidence to be public with it, or this more about a sense of self-awareness that you better understand yourself and what dyslexia brings to then sort of be a little more public with that? What caused you to go from masking to embracing and publicly acknowledging it?
Yeah, for me, it was very much about confidence and feeling that I could have an element of vulnerability in the workplace. I was always very ambitious, and I always felt that I had to fit a certain mold. And I think that the day that I realized that actually maybe being the same as everybody else isn't the best thing all round in any regard for business, but having a different approach to things. And so long as you've got the mix of everybody, that's where the real value comes. And for me, it was definitely confidence and kind of not feeling like I was faking it before I made it type thing that made me able to embrace it and therefore lead with it rather than try to hide behind it.
And I get that takes some time in the workplace to actually see how your decisions and your thinking plays out, to go, oh, okay, I didn't realize that people didn't see there what I could see. So, there's something in this. And then building that sense of confidence and pride of that difference, to then going, actually, I've got something here that you don't have, and I really want to lean into that. Graham, what about yourself in terms of your career and where that might have held you back or pushed you forward in your relationship with dyslexia?
Yeah, and I think good on you, Michelle, for being so open about it. It's probably one of these things I've experienced a bit differently. I remember talking to a leader I worked for probably over 10 years ago, and I mentioned I was dyslexic, and he went, "Oh, but I thought you were pretty smart." And I think the lack of understanding is pretty damning. And I think part of the challenge is probably, and part of the reason I agreed to do this was to say, actually, it's not a learning disability; it's a different way of thinking. And I think certainly, yeah, for me, I've probably taken a different approach from Michelle. So I'd probably over-index on checking my work, making sure it's accurate. If I'm handling data, I make sure I've got really good formulas behind it, because I know that if I try and do the little things well that other people might do faster, it doesn't build up that. I'm more likely to make an error. But I think one of the things with that is that when you start dealing with data or doing something with a formula, it allows you to be flexible and put different variables in. So a lot of people will take the shortcut and build something once. I tend to build something in a way where it's I can follow the links through, I can see the process, and that way it becomes more enduring and sort of more flexible when you need to do some scenario planning or some different things as well. But I think it's probably quite a different story for me, where dyslexia is not something I necessarily, prior to this, came out and said, hey, I'm dyslexic to a large organization, but certainly conceptually, I believe I'm a much stronger thinker, and I really struggle sometimes in trying to work out how to bring other people on that journey. And I think that's important for me to say, look, 1 + 1 = 2. It's pretty obvious, and quite often, people who aren't as strong conceptual thinkers will take some more time to get through that process.
I was joking with you before this last week that your solution to what you were going to do to manage the fuel crisis, you probably already had worked out in your head. Your challenge wasn't how you're going to manage it necessarily and all the different dynamics. It was probably more getting that across to other people to buy in to that level of confidence. And
yeah, well, we just need the government to adopt the strategy I've come up with, and I'm working on that.
Anton, you've been very patiently waiting in the wings there. I might call you in on this topic. And just your thoughts around misconceptions. Graham, you mentioned it's a really dangerous misconception, and some of you might have seen Donald Trump's comments. I mean, boy, is anyone he hasn't offended yet. Dyslexic people is probably one of the final groups where he was giving a bit of a ribbing, shall we say, to the governor of California, who stood up in front of a room and said that they were dyslexic, and to your point, sort of intimated, or more than intimated, that he wasn't smart enough to be president, which is so damning, so disappointing, so undermines what this brain wiring can do. But Anton, misunderstandings around dyslexia, what are common things that you see?
Oh, working in my private practice with adults who are late diagnosed, is that they've been given these negative labels that they are stupid, they are dumb, they are lazy, they are lots of negatives. And basically when they come to me, the realization, and as Graham has already said, it's about brain difference, not brain deficit. Yes, there are areas that are challenging, and stereotypically it is in language or disseminating ideas into the written form or reading, but it's not. Most of the clients that I work with are way above average intelligence. And in fact, they are super capable in certain areas. And the dyslexic brain has often been described in the more recent literature, because the old literature is all about deficit. But in the more recent literature, it's the idea of the brain being wired for discovery rather than rote processing. And it's called the MIND framework that's come out of some research in America, where they talk about different types of reasoning. They talk about material reasoning, which is exceptional visual spatial awareness. I worked with one engineer who could break something apart in his head and then put it back together in his head, and he could see it from all different dimensions. And that's the extent of his visual processing. There's interconnected reasoning, which is what people have already said about the big picture gift, and being able to spot hidden connections that neurotypical brains often won't see. And the narrative reasoning is a powerful long-term memory for personal experiences. So drawing on that heart, and we know that heart sells products, and passion drives innovation and creativity and moving things forward. And again, that's a particular skill of dyslexic brains. And then the final one of the MIND framework is dynamic reasoning, which is making accurate predictions and functioning in a fast changing environment and being able to adapt really, really quickly. Now, we are in an environment where the world is changing faster than it ever has done in the existence of humanity. And so dyslexic brains are at the forefront of that and are really needed. And there's also a really big concordance rate between dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, because all neurodiversities, your profile is your profile and it's unique to you. So another misconception is that, oh, I know what ADHD looks like, I know what dyslexia looks like, but your version of it will be unique to you. So therefore the accommodations that are going to help you thrive will also be unique to you. Yes, there'll be some overlaps, but there'll also be some things that particularly work for you.
I love that example you give of the engineer that can see all the parts. It's almost like an exploded 3D model in their head. I'm sure the builder that worked on our house a few years ago was dyslexic. And his ability to conceptualize the building 3 or 4 steps ahead and know what needed to happen in a way that he could construct the house, it just seemed to be all in his head anyway. He hardly looked at the plans. He just had the whole thing shaped out. I want to dive into a little bit more, thank you, Graham, with you first, around matching cognition with career. And I actually ran a workshop with the Neurodivergent Students Association at AUT a couple of years ago, because I think when you go through university in particular, or actually even getting into university, there's this view that you don't always do what's best for you. You do what an uncle or auntie or mum or dad or someone close to you suggests is a good path or career to take. And you don't take the time, or someone doesn't help you to take time to understand what is it about your brain and how you think that suits a particular path or career, we tend to just stumble down a path and work out sometime later that, oh, it seems to match me, or it doesn't. And that's why people come over my desk looking for a career change in their late 20s going, look, I've been doing this thing for a while and it's not me. I want to reinvent myself. But it seems quite nicely suited to these complex supply chains and really dynamic environments. Graham, how's it specifically help shape how you lead and manage yourself in that context?
I think one of the things about dyslexia is you get very good at spotting where things can go wrong, because you possibly make more mistakes than others around that accuracy and that detail. And things like a supply chain network where you want to your measure of success is everything gets done on time. Every single failure is a pain point. So I think you get really good at understanding where problems could exist, and then building a resilient system to ensure that there's no room for errors. And I think that conceptual thinking, but also that understanding of how people think, I think that's been really useful for me. So how do you come up with a simple message for people? Like how do you find the pain points? How do you, like, for us in one of our distribution centers, if we get 3 more boxes on every pallet dispatched, that saves us $1 million, round numbers. That's a really powerful, simple message. And it's part of that was sitting down and saying, well, why are they not stacking these things higher? Oh, well, it's extra work, it's an extra thing. So how do we get someone on board and make add some value in the message to people, turn it into a way that's a different way to communicate. But certainly, from my experiences, is you look at things differently. You can see the gaps, you can see the connections, and you can see where people make mistakes. And I think a lot of the last 5 years we've had massive success in safety. So we've I think 5 or 6 years ago in the business, when we had 27 serious crashes on road with the carrier partners we work with. And we again got really good at understanding the root cause. And as a big part of that, we said, here's the key risks areas. It's not what people think, it's driver distraction. And we saw that trend again and again. And we then said, okay, well, what's the solve? So it's the 2-way driver facing cameras. It's the and then we still have problems. And it's like, okay, well, the camera's not working. What's all of the things that have let us down? And we've almost got that down to zero. And just the amount of improvement in that space has been absolutely incredible. But comes from thinking about where are the things going wrong, where are the human factors. And I think dyslexics are probably better at seeing where things can go wrong and predicting them in advance, and then building that resilient system to ensure that there's no room for errors.
Yeah, great example. And I often say to people that simple is hard. It's easy to explain things in complicated manners, but the ability to simplify a very complex situation and down into layman's terms, or down into something, your example of just 3 more boxes on a pallet, just distill a significant challenge or opportunity right down to a very simple message for people is harder than I think sometimes we understand it to be. Michelle, no surprise that you've done a lot of work around innovation, transformation and growth, and you alluded to it earlier on that's your way of thinking's help with that. Can you dive into a little bit more around the how?
Yeah, so that's definitely, as a leader, something I've landed on that is my sweet spot, is being able to see that future state and in a way that maybe others don't necessarily. And also having the ability to, kind of what Graham said, is to sort of see the obstacles that are going to take place in order to get to that end state, and being able to simplify it. And maybe I'll give, if it's okay, Tony, a good example and an example of what actually happened probably a couple of decades ago. I'm showing my age now, so I don't know how old the callers on the line are, but for those of you who were around back in the day, you might remember this funny little device called the BlackBerry that sent emails and did it in a way that was really good. Well, I was working in the mobile telecommunications sector back then, and it was one of those times where everyone kept talking about next year or this year is going to be the mobile data year. And nobody could quite see what that looked like. And I just had this thought of, what if we could just get this device and get it in the hands of everybody, and everybody could start doing things differently to what they were used to. And I went against the grain, and I basically managed to convince the board at the time to do something totally differently, because I could see this end state, and I stuck by it, and I had the courage to do it. And before I knew it, I was riding the underground in London and seeing just about every other person had a BlackBerry in their hands. But that took a different way of thinking about how we did things to be able to make that happen. So I think that's one of the things that, I mean, Graham, you said it much more eloquently, that the dyslexic brain can do, is to sort of see end states and work out what the potential hurdles are on the way to get there, and distill it into a simplified version for others, for everybody to understand.
Thank you. Yeah, great example too. Anton, I just wanted to switch to you. There may well be some people on this in this webinar sort of feeling like they're still at coping stage. They're at an early stage in their career and working, as we all do, to varying degrees. You know, who am I? What's the value I bring in a workplace? What's the right role for me? But doing it through the lens of dyslexia. What do you think, in your experience working with lots of different individuals in different contexts, helps people move from coping with dyslexia to generally thriving with it or having it work for them?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because very often we think that we're the problem, in a sense, that we have to change ourselves, and yet it's very often, if we are put in the right environment, then we can thrive rather than merely survive. So the things from an organizational point of view or a leadership point of view that can be really helpful is to help people realize what their strengths are and play to their strengths. And it sounds obvious, but most organizations don't do that. They put people, they have a unicorn description, they should be good at everything, and then when you fall down in one area, you end up focusing on your deficit area rather than your strength area, which then just, it reduces the reward and the pleasure of the brain, and therefore your ability to cope reduces. So how to thrive, it's play to your strengths. So for a dyslexic person, it's being able to make sure that the work that you are surrounded by is predominantly visual and verbal, and relying less on written material. If it is written material, then for certain brains, certain colors and certain fonts can be quite useful to work with. And there's quite a lot of literature on the internet just about which work best for which brains. But again, it's a try it and see for yourself. As a leader, being able to help people focus on outcomes rather than the process. It's like, well, as long as you get there, I don't need to micromanage you, because a lot of dyslexic brains go, well, I'm so far ahead of you, I don't even want to explain, because I've already worked out the solution. So just let them get on with it. Playing to their strengths, like giving them the opportunity to think creatively, think strategically, think big picture. Don't get bogged down in the details. Don't expect them to provide the details. Again, it's like, well, what does your brain thrive on, and how can I support your brain to thrive? And if there are things that have to be done, it's how can it be done safely? In other words, you know, rather than write things down and type, can I have access to a speech to type process? Or if I'm being given information that I have to read, can it be more pictorial than linguistic? Or can it be large bullet points rather than lots of detail? And again, from a how do I thrive, or how do I help my team thrive, it's having those conversations from a strengths-based point of view. How do I help you get into a brain space so that I am maximizing those amazing capabilities that you have? And how do we mitigate some of those blocks to using that skill set?
And that's just going back to what I think, Graham, you mentioned it before, and the use of AI just exploding in everyday work environments, and the number of people I hear that have to break down a large body of work, and they just drop it into AI and say, turn this into a podcast so I can listen to it, please. Does that sound familiar? Yeah,
absolutely. We've got the Google Suite, and some of the stuff's fantastic. So we've got Notebook LM. We had a massive tender. We just dumped it all in there, asked us, and then we could ask questions of it. So it was incredibly useful for some of those things there, I suppose. And again, summarising, I don't think in this day and age we should be expecting leaders to accommodate, but we should be making sure the team members have got the tools themselves. And I think that's probably where my head would be at, is if you're a dyslexic or you have someone dyslexic in your team, how do you make sure that they've got the right tools to summarise and deliver that stuff? Because it's pretty seamless.
Yeah, there's a lot of options out there now, even compared to five years ago, which is pretty cool. And so I just want to touch on this notion of leadership here and the role it plays, because I remember as a young leader myself many years ago, I made the mistake of thinking that my role as a leader, in part at least, was to fill in the blanks, if you like, or work on the strengths, work on the weaknesses, round somebody out to be the complete person. But I realized that's a hiding to nowhere as a leader, because we all have strengths and weaknesses. So actually, you're better off to let go of that and realize that your role as a leader is to allow people's strengths to shine, not hold them back in being able to achieve more by getting to fix the little thing that doesn't quite work for them. And boy, I tell you what, as a leader, when I finally realized that, what someone pointed out earlier, it just made leadership more fun. And it's the example of where you can round a role even within an existing job description. I think you can tweak your expectations of what somebody does in the role to set them free in the areas they're best at, and find ways through technology or other support mechanisms to fill in the gaps, shall we say. And that's the same for anybody, regardless of cognition. I think it's a really powerful switch for a leader to have.
Well, it's been, again, research is out there. People can look at it. One example from America, again, was that they looked at Air Force pilots who were in training, and they split them into two. And the one group were focused on picking up on their deficits and what they were doing wrong and what they needed to improve. And the other ones were focusing on their strengths and leveraging them and saying, well, how do I maximize those strengths? And in terms of their progress, they were 30% better, quicker than the people who have been focused on their deficits. So all of our brains thrive on being reinforced in terms of our strengths. And if you're neurodiverse, you're more likely to have what's called a spiky profile. So in other words, there'll be super strengths in certain areas and some super challenges too. But if you try and put effort into leveraging or elevating your deficits, which are already much lower than the average, the effort required and the success that you get is much, much smaller than leveraging the strengths that you're already good at.
That's a nice way of putting it. Thank you. Michelle, I'm going to switch to you first on this one. And this is as we get into slightly more practical strategies that perhaps you've brought to bear or realized have worked for you, some habits or tools. Graham, you talked a little bit around some of the tools you used before, routines, anything that you've found through your career has helped you in a day-to-day basis leverage this dyslexia of yours.
Yeah, and I think I would categorize the areas that I've kind of really focused on into three. One is how I bring to life visual thinking and some of the strategies around that. The second is the use of technology, which we've touched on with AI, etc. And the third is surrounding myself by complementary thinkers. So if I start just an example on visual thinking, like many dyslexic people, a page full of words isn't my friend, but turning something into a picture is a lot more useful. So what I've done in my last two leadership CEO roles is turning into the company's strategy into a picture, a pictorial view of the whole strategy. And what's been amazing, and kind of Anton, you touched on this, is in some ways is that it wasn't just the dyslexic thinkers that took advantage of this way of doing it. It's actually, having a picture on a page that people can look at and point at. And all of a sudden you're finding some of my business development managers are speaking to customers about it. Some of my government engagement people are speaking to ministers about it, and having just a different way for different audiences of using something more visual to tell the story and then that lends into storytelling, which is a different mechanism. So that's one thing. Another one for me which has been really, really useful. And I really, it's something I do with every complex situation I encounter, is I have this quadrant that I use on a page when I'm having to quickly distill some information, whether it's for a media interview, whether it's for an interview, like just a personal interview, or a complex topic. And I have a quadrant where I put certain bits of information in the quadrant, and it's very, very visual. And it means that my brain has absorbed it, A, by writing it, but secondly, I can sort of see that I always know that the stats are in the top left, for example, the context is in the bottom left, or the Y is in the top right, that kind of thing. So it just really helps me. And that's my method. But again, it's been, for me as a leader, really useful when, for example, I've had media teams and they're putting me in front of the TV on a live interview on a really complex, politically sensitive subject, that they know that this is how I absorb quickly, so they're able to then help me with that. So the same in reverse as a leader is making sure that you have these conversations with your team to see what works for different people, and not everything that's just for dyslexic thinking is just for dyslexic people. as I say, a lot of these tools can go across the whole population in different ways.
I just wanted
Love
to
that.
add to that,
Yeah.
add to that, Michelle, that totally agree that people often think about how do we accommodate neurodiversity in the workplace, but it's not that. What's good for neurodiverse brains is often good for everyone in the workplace. So it's useful for everyone. So completely agree.
I was going to say the same thing. Absolutely, Natalie. Like the things that I've developed around frameworks or process, that I use in my team, it just becomes so powerful for everyone else too.
Yeah. Awesome. Just a quick plug on the Q&A. We've got a few minutes left, a couple more questions, but then we'll jump to any questions you might have as an audience. So you've got 5 minutes or so to throw your thoughts in there, please, into the Q&A section. I want to switch to, and we've talked a little bit already around this notion of, good leadership is going to help bring out the best in anybody and play to people's strengths. But I just want to dive in a little bit more on that. So for anyone on this webinar that might be leading others, what are some of the simplest things, Anton? I'll start with you. That you think employers or managers can do to make the biggest difference for dyslexic people? We talked a little bit about before, but just diving back into that topic around just having the workplace set up for success.
Yeah, it's having conversations where you listen to understand the person's challenges and strengths. And I've got a neurodiverse profile that is a great starter point. It's a 12-point scale in 4 quadrants. It's very visual, that it helps managers or leaders have a conversation with their team going, well, what is your profile like? And where do you shine, and how can I best support you in that? And where are the areas that we perhaps might need to delegate or consider changing the role profile? How do we adapt so that what we are expecting you to do and how we are expecting you to do it matches your profile as closely as possible? And then what do you need from me in order to mitigate any of those risks where it's more challenging to be able to do things? I mean, a very quick example is that for me, I was recruited by a company called Stop that worked with sex offenders in the community, and they rang me up and said, can you do the clinical role? And I said, well, yeah, love the clinical role, that's my strength, but I'm absolutely useless at admin. I'm admin phobic, I hate it. If you want me to be a general manager, forget it. And so what they did is they split the role. So I did the clinical role and they got another manager to do the manager role. I would have lasted 3 or 4 months if I'd been expected to do everything, but I've been there for 6 years now. So think differently. How do we not create unicorns in the recruitment process and say you should be good at everything and your profile, your work expectations match that? How do we say, well, okay, what is essential for this role? What are the things that we're looking for? If we were to have a spiky profile, what's the spiky profile that we're trying to recruit for? Not a jack of all trades, but a master of some.
I love that notion of spiky profile, where there's more obvious highs and probably more obvious, lows, if you like, of areas where you probably need more support to bring it, to allow you to bring out your strengths. What I find typically is a bit of a generalization. Those that do have slightly different brains to the norm are actually more self-aware than most. Those jack of all trades brains are still trying to work out where their superpower is, and then they're okay at lots of things, but that's much harder it's much murkier to work through to go, well, what do I bring to a situation? Whereas those brains that are different are more quick to go, well, here's what I'm really strong at. But unfortunately, because of the way society is set up, which is about providing labels that are unhelpful early in life, we also focus more often on the bottom end of the spikes too, the areas where we think we're not good at, and we almost have that front of mind too much. So there's a great level of self-awareness to tap into when you're sitting with someone to go, look, your brain's a little different to the norm. How do I set you up? Someone who I think is neurodivergent is more likely to articulate that than someone who is that jack of all trades. Thoughts from Graham or Michelle on this notion of leading those with dyslexic brains?
I think the comment around building teams with people with different skills is super relevant regardless of the field. I spend an awful lot of time in recruitment. Everyone tells me, makes fun of how long I take to recruit people, but particularly in the New Zealand market, where it can be hard to move people around once they've settled. I spend a lot of time getting the right people, and the most important thing is how they fit into the team. And I think some of that is having, like, I need a good process thinker to work with me. So I've got someone in my team who's very process orientated. I've got someone in my team who's very people orientated. And just building up that sort of that complete team with people who are superstars in the areas. I think that's been super important to my success, and regardless of their neurodivergence or otherwise. But I think probably to Anton's point is people who are neurodiverse in some aspect are probably going to be slightly more biased and probably need a stronger balance in other spaces. But certainly that's been hugely important for me.
So you're quite deliberate, Graham, when you think about the makeup of your team at any one time, of what have I got, what are the holes I need to plug to bring different ways of thinking. That's really interesting.
Incredibly so. It's okay. We want someone in this team who's going to be a bit more, bring some energy in. We need someone who's going to have some more people aspects. I've got lots of different analytical people. Those are the kind of things that we talk about when we recruit, as much as the capability. Lights gone off.
Yeah. Michelle, anything to add on this topic around being led or leading?
Yeah, I was going to actually focus on the leading. So as somebody who, we talk a lot about the requirements of a leader when they have people who have dyslexia in their team. But what about the other way around? A leader with dyslexia, with different types of thinking and processing in your team. And one thing I've learned in some cases the hard way as a leader with dyslexia is that not everybody can see the big picture in the way that I see it, and not everybody is comfortable jumping right there without going through the detail in a processed manner. And especially when you're talking about transformation and change in the workplace, I've learned, as I say, the hard way, that I have to allow people to have their own processing methods to get to the end result, and not just assume that everybody's going to be able to get as excited as I am about jumping to the end and the strategy without actually going through and going through their own method to get there. And what Graham says is so true. And I'm the same as Graham, my team get absolutely crazy with me with how careful I'm at recruiting and being really cognizant of what you have in terms of the whole jigsaw puzzle of a makeup of a team. But with that comes complexity, because you're dealing with lots of different people who process and get to their outcomes or the outcome in different ways. So being really aware, if you're on the call and you are a dyslexic leader, that you're making sure that you're accounting for the fact that not everybody can jump to that end result without the granularity of what they need to get there.
Yeah, I think that the difference between dealing with black and white and dealing with grey, I think dyslexics are great at dealing with uncertainty, and I think as you get into more larger, more complex roles, having to deal with that uncertainty and that complexity is super important. And then the challenge is dealing with the people who want certainty, who want to know. One of the people in my team wants to know that what the budget is, what are the steps to get there. And I was like, we'll get there. I have absolute confidence. Directionally, we've got these 5 pieces of work that are going to deliver this result. That's hard for them to hear, because they want to know the exact plan and when we're starting and finishing each piece of work, which you just can't do. And I think if you've got an agile mindset, I'm talking about agile mindset rather than a methodology from a program point of view. You've actually just got to get on and do some things and make sure you're putting the right way directionally. And I think my thinking style is pretty suited to that.
Love it. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm conscious of time, and I want to see if there has been any questions pop through to answer, to give some time to those. So just a minute longer if you haven't thought of anything yet, or you haven't typed it in, please do so. But as that's happening, just some closing reflections from the three of you. If you were to finish with a takeaway from each of you, something that those on this webinar could take with them, as what's one thing you'd like them each to take away from today? And I might start with you, Graham.
I think it's not a disability, it's a difference. That's the number one single point. And I think, particularly when you're starting off, maybe you've got to be a little bit more, you've got to work harder. I think Michelle's comment there, you got to work harder to get to the point where you can be in a leadership role. But certainly it's a superpower as well.
Michelle, go to you next. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that probably would have been my first thank you, Graham, for stealing it, my first thought. But I think the other thing that I've discovered, with age and wiseness, is that your career doesn't succeed despite dyslexia. It succeeds because of it, so long as you're prepared to embrace it. And be vulnerable at some point to embrace it, is what I would say.
I love that. And what we haven't touched on today, though, I just want to bring into this conversation now, actually, is this notion of when to disclose and how to disclose and should I disclose. And this is very easy for me to say. I'm not necessarily in the situation of having to do that and feeling if it's right or not. But my view is you find your people, and if you're loud and proud around what you bring and what you offer and your value, and you're confident in dyslexia and what it does for you, then you gravitate to the environment and the leaders and the people that allow you to set that free, and you don't get stuck in the place that doesn't work for you. And Tom, some final thoughts from you in terms of takeaway?
Yeah, I think given that we're talking about dyslexia in the context of recruitment and organizations, is that I know from personal experience that there are a lot of organizations who their current recruitment methods are, without realizing it, excluding some of these amazing talents because of what they're looking for. So, for example, if they're looking for a well-written CV or a covering letter, they may be missing the point. It's like, what is essential in terms of the brain profile for this job? Anything that is non-essential, don't select for or exclude for when you're trying to select people. So I would say really think critically about what the job is about and what brain profile you need for the job. And Zeb was just asking about the profile. If he wants to contact me or directly, that's absolutely fine. Anybody who wants to, it's freely available, but I do a coaching session where I just coach you through how to use the tool. But it's very simple. It's there are no questions. It just shows you a profile, and it's a really good starting point to try and understand your profile and also understand the profile of the people around you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, we won't have time today to go into the ins and outs of recruitment and what works and doesn't. But there's one thing you shouldn't do, I think. There's a few things you shouldn't do, but certainly don't go to market recruiting using a job description as an understanding of what you're looking for. Job description's a set of duties that someone might do once they're in the job, but it doesn't help you identify the type of brain required to excel in it, which is really dangerous. And we've made a stand here at Cultivate. While we use AI every day, in fact, we jokingly put on the bottom of our job ads that we use AI to help write the ad, but we never use AI to help assess the talent. Because I think we've got this very danger of this very, very superficial outlook when we're thinking about talent. And once you start to use AI to read an AI written CV, we've kind of lost. And I think there's a huge amount of nuance in our job to cut below what's said to understand who is the person behind this document. And if I'm honest, I think probably, no disrespect to people who've written CVs, I've had to write them myself from time to time. CVs are very commonly a poor representation of the author. It's a very hard document to write, do justice to your capability in 2 or 3 pages. And often we fall short of explaining what our strengths and superpowers are. Sometimes because we're modest or humble and we don't want to put that out there as Kiwis, that's quite common. Or we just misuse the opportunity, I think, to realise it's actually a sales tool. It's not a list of duties and responsibilities previously. So if you're going to use AI to read that, which is flawed in the first place, then your whole recruitment process is flawed. There needs that human nuance, as I talked about before. Conscious of the time, Rachel, we're just going to flick across to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, we've had a couple come through the chat, but we have got a great one from Tristan that hopefully everyone could provide a little bit of insights on. But I'll pop over to you first, Anton. So Tristan's asked, how can a young person with dyslexia go about choosing training, a career that would be a good match for them?
I would say try and sit down with someone other than yourself, because it's called body doubling. Body doubling is great for creative thinking for younger people. I mean, it's great for everybody who's neurodiverse. That it's the creative ideas, and think about, well, what are my strengths? What is it that I am good at? When my brain is it's called a green brain state, a flow state. What makes my brain flow? Is it creativity? Is it data and facts and information? Is it structure and processes? Is it people focus? Is it action and entrepreneurship? and have a discussion with someone else who also knows you quite well, because we are often somewhat blasé when we think our brains just do what everyone else's brains do, and actually we may be doing something way better than other people. So it's good to get that alternative perspective rather than just do it yourself.
Yeah, perfect. Agreed. Anything to add on that one, Graham or Michelle? No,
Perfect.
awesome.
I think no difference from any other person. I think it's probably the call out.
Yeah. And I think it kind of a few things that we've had come through in the chat, which you touched on as well, Anton, just around understanding yourself and your own profile. Kind of understanding that first will then allow you to see what roles need those superpowers and those strengths that would be best suited to you, kind of going forward. So, which is great.
And it goes for that time as an 18-year-old where you feel like you've got to suddenly make a really important life choice that's going to, you don't realise you've got an opportunity to change careers 4 or 5 times in your lifetime. You've still got this naive view of the world that whatever you decide to study and then do to start your career is what you're stuck with for the rest of your life. So you've put yourself, I've seen it with people close to me, you put yourself under a lot of pressure as a 17, 18-year-old to try and work out what you want to study or not study and what you want to do in the next 2 or 3 years, thinking that's it, that's my only chance. And we tend to too often at that point, I think, make the decision based on what someone else did and was successful with. Oh, look at Uncle John. He's had an amazing career as a lawyer. I think I should be a lawyer. Look at the money he makes. Drives a nice car. I think I want to do that as a 17-year-old, because that's important, right? Money at that point and nice cars. But we need to strip back below that and actually work out, but you're better off to focus on what you're great at, rather than what you think might be a rewarding career because of salary or because of what someone else has done is unique and different to you.
Definitely. Cool.
Anything else? Final question?
We have an interesting one come through from Jennifer, and I will ask this one in the lens of dyslexia or kind of neurodivergence. But what's everyone's opinion on mandatory company-wide diversity, or say neurodiversity training, versus waiting for employees to volunteer to sign up for it? Anyone's got any thoughts on that? I guess how that could impact workplaces.
So do you make people do training on this, or do you give them the choice?
Or wait, yeah.
Any thoughts?
Mandatory is bad is probably my thing for a lot of, like, if you have mandatory cultural awareness, if you have mandatory, all of that stuff, as soon as you make it mandatory rather than something that people have an opportunity to grow and show interest in, I think that can be a challenge. And I think part of that is making it to a point where people are interested in doing it for themselves for the right reasons rather than being forced to do it.
As soon as someone's forced to do something, you can get an adverse reaction just because you're forced to do it. Yeah. Anton?
No, I was just about to say the same thing, that it's not making people aware, it's making them interested in learning more. That's the thing
nice
that
way of putting it.
To push.
Yeah,
nice way of putting it. And very good. All right, well, I'm conscious of time. We've got 2-3 minutes left before the hour. Hopefully that's time to grab the rest of the sandwich for those that are on the call. Certainly for Graham, Michelle and Anton, let you go and have some lunch now. Thank you once again for coming on and being so generous with your time and being so open about your own experiences as well. As I said, really, really important to shine a light on the positivity and the opportunity that comes with dyslexia. So thank you once again from everyone on this call for being a part of it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you very much.
Guys.
Thank you.